All right, hey there. So glad you could join us for this deep dive. This week, we're tackling something that I know a lot of you are curious about. And, you sent in some fascinating material about it too, and it's all about essential tremor and, well, let's be honest, coffee.
Coffee, yeah. It's
Okay.
that drink that so many of us rely on.
Right, and it's that morning jolt, or for some of us, maybe that afternoon pick me up. And you're wondering, is there a connection?
Yeah, could it be making things, worse for people with essential tremor?
Exactly. Could it be influencing tremors either for you or maybe someone close to you? That's exactly what we're going to dig into today.
Right, we're going to explore this whole relationship between caffeine, especially from coffee, and essential tremor. And we're going to look at both, what the science has to say, but also those personal experiences that are often so valuable.
So the main thing you shared with us was this really interesting article. It's from Tremor.Today, and it's titled, Does Caffeine Affect Essential Tremor? And
Yes, it's a great piece.
it is. It really is. They lay it out so well. First, they explain what essential tremor is. Then they go into how caffeine works in our bodies. And then they bring those two things together and talk about that potential link between them.
Right, and they don't just stop there. They actually offer some suggestions for managing things.
Yeah, and they even highlight when it's a good idea to reach out to a healthcare professional.
Exactly, so really practical guidings in there too.
So with this deep dive, our goal is to, pull out the most important, most useful information from this article.
Yeah, we want to make it crystal clear. Does caffeine, especially from coffee, have an impact on essential tremor? And if so, what can you do about it?
Okay, so let's unpack this whole thing. First off, for anyone who might not be super familiar with it, what exactly is essential tremor?
Essential tremor, or ET, as it's often called, is a neurological condition where the primary symptom is, involuntary rhythmic shaking.
Shaking. Oh,
Yeah. It's like, imagine an internal metronome, but it's a little offbeat. It's not quite keeping the right time.
I like that analogy. Yeah.
And it most commonly affects the hands.
Yeah.
But it can involve the head, the voice,
Yeah.
and sometimes even other parts of the body.
Okay. And this isn't something that necessarily has like a clear-cut cause, right?
Right. It can be one of those things that just kind of pops up.
Yeah.
The article mentions that it can be inherited, so it can run in families.
Okay.
But it can also occur in individuals with no family history of tremor at all.
So it's kind of a mystery in some cases.
Yeah, a little bit. And as we get older, it tends to show up more often. And another thing that's important to keep in mind, these tremors, they often become more noticeable or even intense when someone is moving or under stress.
Ah, that makes sense. So if you're already feeling a bit shaky and then you get stressed, it can kind of amplify it.
Exactly. And that can make everyday tasks, things that we all take for granted, like writing, eating, even just holding a cup of coffee, quite challenging.
It sounds so disruptive to just, daily life. But the good news is the article does say that while it can impact quality of life, generally it's not considered a serious health risk on its own.
Right. It's not typically life-threatening, but it can definitely make life more difficult.
So it's more about managing it, right?
Absolutely. And that's where understanding potential triggers, like caffeine, becomes so important.
Okay, so caffeine, I think we all kind of have a sense of what it does, right? Like it wakes us up, gives us that little boost. But what's actually happening in our bodies when we drink that coffee?
Well, caffeine is actually the world's most widely consumed central nervous system stimulant. And its main mechanism of action is it blocks adenosine.
Adenosine.
Yeah, it's a neurotransmitter. You can think of it as like the brain's brake pedal.
Okay, the brake pedal, so it's trying to slow things down.
Exactly. It promotes sleep and it, slows down nerve activity.
Okay.
And caffeine essentially blocks that brake. So it's saying, nope, keep going.
So it's keeping the brain active, keeping it alert.
Exactly. And what happens then is that we see a boost in the brain's energy metabolism.
Okay.
We also see activation of noradrenaline neurons. And noradrenaline is kind of like, the brain's alert system, is a part of that fight or flight response.
Right, right.
And it influences dopamine release. And dopamine's associated with pleasure and reward.
So all of those things are firing when you have caffeine.
So the overall effect is that increased alertness, that arousal, and that reduced fatigue that we all associate with caffeine.
Yeah. And it explains why I reach for that second cup sometimes. But the article did point out that these effects can vary a lot from person to person.
Yeah, that's a really important point. While caffeine can have benefits for some people in terms of learning, memory, even physical performance, how much of an effect it has really differs from person to person.
Right. Some people can drink a pot of coffee and be fine, and others, have one cup and they're bouncing off the walls.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And of course, we got to consider those potential downsides too.
Yeah, those downsides. Like, I get a little jittery sometimes if I've had a bit too much. Or like my heart starts racing.
hmm Those are some of the common side effects. Jitteriness, increased heart rate, anxiety, and it can even mess with your sleep.
Oh, yeah. Sleep is definitely impacted.
And then, some people can develop a dependence on caffeine. And if they suddenly stop, they might go through withdrawal.
Oh, yeah. Headaches, fatigue, the whole works. Not fun.
Not fun.
Okay, so we've got this stimulant that can really get our nervous system going. And this is where it gets really interesting, right? How does all of this connect to essential tremor?
Well, the thinking is caffeine stimulates the nervous system.
Okay.
It can increase dopamine levels.
Mm-hmm.
And so the hypothesis is that those effects could make essential tremor symptoms worse.
Right.
You've already got this neurological condition causing tremors.
Right.
And if you add more stimulation on top of that, it makes sense that it might amplify that shaking. And the article mentions that some people with ET do report feeling shakier after caffeine, especially from coffee.
Yeah, that seems to make intuitive sense, right? You have a tremor, you consume something that's a stimulant, and the tremor seems to get worse. It's like, well, yeah, of course. But what does the research actually say about this?
Well, here's where it gets a bit tricky. Because research that specifically looked at caffeine's impact on essential tremor, it's actually pretty limited.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But there's some interesting statistics in the article. They mentioned that only about 2% of people without tremor report feeling shakier after coffee.
Okay, 2%, so a pretty small number.
Yeah. But that number jumps to 8% for folks with essential tremor
Wow.
and 6% for people with Parkinson's disease.
So a much higher percentage, especially for the essential tremor group.
Right, which seems to suggest that there could be a link there.
Yeah, that's pretty significant.
But here's where it gets even more interesting. When researchers actually did formal tests, they gave people a single dose of caffeine.
Okay.
A pretty big dose, too.
Yeah.
325 milligrams,
Mm-hmm.
which is more than in your average cup of coffee. And they didn't see a significant increase in tremor intensity.
Really?
Not in the ET patients, not in the Parkinson's patients, and it didn't increase natural tremor in people without those conditions either.
So the controlled studies didn't really back up what people are reporting anecdotally?
Right, which is kind of surprising.
Yeah.
But it shows how complex this relationship is.
Mm.
What we experience in our everyday lives, it doesn't always match perfectly with what happens in these controlled studies.
Right. It's a controlled environment. It's just one dose.
Exactly. It could be that it's the total amount of caffeine we consume throughout the day,
Mm-hmm.
maybe the timing of it, relative to our tremor fluctuations.
Yeah.
Or it could be the interaction with other individual factors,
Mm.
right? Everyone's a little bit different. It's not a simple yes or no answer.
It's more like it depends.
Yeah, it depends is a good way to put it.
So your mileage may vary, as they say. And the article does emphasize that reactions to caffeine are highly individual.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One person with ET might see a noticeable increase in their tremor after just one cup.
Right.
And someone else with ET might be able to have several cups throughout the day and feel no difference at all.
So if you have essential tremor and you're like, I wonder if my coffee habit is playing into this, what's the best way to figure that out?
The article really emphasizes self-monitoring, paying attention to your own body's responses.
Okay.
That's often the most reliable way to understand and manage that potential connection between symptoms and caffeine intake.
So for our listener out there who's like, okay, this is all great information, but what can I actually do?
Yeah.
What strategies does the article recommend for managing ET and caffeine intake?
Well, if you suspect that caffeine might be making your tremors worse, the first thing to try is reducing your intake.
Okay.
And they recommend doing it gradually, taper down slowly rather than quitting cold turkey,
Makes sense, yeah.
because that can help minimize those withdrawal symptoms.
Right, nobody wants a caffeine withdrawal headache on top of everything else.
Exactly. Another strategy is to look for caffeine-free alternatives.
Okay, so like decaf coffee or herbal tea.
Exactly. You can still enjoy the ritual of that warm drink, without the caffeine kick.
Right, because sometimes it's more than just the caffeine, it's the habit, it's the routine.
Exactly.
And what about that symptom journal?
Oh yeah, a symptom journal can be incredibly helpful.
So like write down when you have caffeine, how much, and then track how bad your tremors are throughout the day.
Yeah, exactly. That way you can start to see if there are any patterns, any connections there. It's like your own personalized research project.
Right, you're gathering data on your own body, and
Yeah.
then you can see those trends. That's really smart. And what if someone does start to notice a link between their caffeine intake and their tremors? When should they talk to a doctor?
Well, the article stresses that you should always talk to your doctor or a neurologist before making any big changes to your caffeine habits.
Okay, so don't just quit cold turkey without talking to your doctor first.
Right, especially if you depend on caffeine for energy or if you're thinking about cutting it out completely.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Because a doctor can help figure out if caffeine is really a factor.
Mm-hmm.
They can also rule out any other things that might be contributing, and they can suggest treatments or lifestyle changes that are right for
All
you.
right. Because it might not be just caffeine, it might be other things too.
Exactly. And the article also mentions that there are a bunch of different treatment options for essential tremor besides just diet.
Oh, right, like medications and therapies.
Mhm. And a doctor can give you the full rundown on those.
So, putting it all together, the main takeaway here seems to be that caffeine's effect on essential tremor, it really depends on the person.
Yeah, it's highly individual.
Yes.
Some people, it's going to make their tremors worse. Others won't notice much of a difference.
So, paying close attention to your own body and talking to your doctor are key.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because what might be a trigger for one person might not be for another.
Yeah, your mileage may vary. So, for our listener out there, as you're processing all of this, remember that figuring out your own body's response to caffeine, that's a big step you can take in managing your ET.
Yeah, take this information, maybe start that symptom journal if you think it'll be helpful, and definitely talk to your doctor about what you notice. They're there to help you figure things out.
And here's a final thought for you to chew on. We've seen how personal experience and research can sometimes tell slightly different stories about caffeine's impact. So what other seemingly small things in your life, maybe things you haven't even considered, might also be playing a role in your symptoms? That's something to think about and maybe discuss with your doctor. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for listening.